So this is our first video for Unit 2, Cell Boundaries. We're going to talk about the cell membrane and the cell wall. So the cell membrane can be thought of as the border of the cell. It protects the cell from everything surrounding it. So basically anything inside the cell is inside the cell membrane. Anything outside is not part of the cell. Because it's the barrier, it regulates what enters and leaves the cell. So therefore, it can control what can and can't come into the cell. And how that happens is something that we're going to talk about later on in this unit. The cell membrane is fairly thin and it's pretty flexible. Plant cells have a cell wall outside of the cell membrane that give them a little bit more structure and support, but even so, the cell membrane can still provide some support, give the cell some shape, and again, provide some protection. So specifically, the cell membrane is made up of a double layer sheet called a lipid bilayer. So let's break down that word right there. So lipid refers to fats, and the term bilayer, bi means two. So it's going to be two layers of fat molecules. So the lipids in the cell membrane happen to be of a group called phospholipids, and this simply means that they have a phosphate group attached to their fatty acid tails. The head of the phospholipid is hydrophilic, which means water-loving, and that is the part in the diagram right here that, I can get my pointer, the diagram right here, this is the water-loving part, and then the tails, this part down here, is the hydrophobic or water-fearing part. So when we come over here, you can see that the water-loving part is pointed outside the cell membrane and also inside, because we know that the inside of the cell is also water-based, just like outside of the cell. And then this little middle part of the cell membrane, this is where the hydrophobic tails go, so that way they don't actually have to touch the water. They kind of line up along each other so that way they can stay away from the water that's inside the cell and the water that's outside the cell. So in addition to these lipids, cell membranes also have a few other things. They have proteins that usually act as channels and pumps, things that will allow molecules to enter or exit the cell. If it's a channel, then it's probably something that's moving across on its own. And if it's a pump, then it probably requires energy. There's also carbohydrates embedded in the cell. Here you can see in the diagram some carbohydrate chains sticking off. And these basically act as an ID card, telling cells, other cells, who that cell is. So you can think about it like a driver's license or an ID card, signifying who that cell is. Now we move on to cell walls. Cell walls are only found in plants, fungi, and bacteria. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. The cell wall is found outside of the cell membrane. So in this diagram, this very thin, sort of tan brown area would be the cell membrane. And then the cell wall is this thicker green, more rigid part of the structure. Although they are very rigid, they do have pores, or basically little like portholes that allow water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide to pass through, since the cell needs to make sure to take in certain molecules and get rid of them. So it can't be too stiff and rigid so as not to have these holes that allow for the transport of these different materials. All right, that's going to be the end of it.